I'm going to sort of focus at a whole farm level. We've got a lot of detail today about particular really important aspects of sheep production. I want to go talk about the whole farm level and talk about sort of strategic stuff about where might you go from here if you're running a business medium size at the moment, high equity, really good at it, and you face the question, now what do I do? So that's the context I want you to keep in mind. It reflects some work we're doing at Hamilton, a project called Lamb Directions, where we take a really good operator and say, well, what's their choices for the next 10 or 15 years, because the world's going to change, right? So that's the things to keep in mind. The world's going to change, and you're going to either, you can sort of be part of it and manage it, or have it thrust upon you. But I seem to spend all my career, I think, talking about coping with change. I remember I was up in the Mallee, where I'm from, Victorian Mallee, when we were getting rid of the wheat board, and I was talking about the merits of deregulation and what a good thing it would be to get rid of the wheat board. And you can imagine that went down really well there, because that was where, so the wheat board was like the church at home, and Jack McEwen was the Pope. And after the talk, we were standing out in the dark, sort of having a tin around the fire, and I was over one side in the dark, and the other guys, the farmers, around the other side, and the chairman came out, who I'd got to know a bit, and he got stuck into the farmers saying, "Which of you blokes called that economist a bastard?" And I heard one of the farmers say, "Who called that bastard an economist?" So, you get used to, that's why there's not many farm economists left. We get sick of the abuse. What I want to talk about, I've got some slides. We've written a paper. I always believe in writing a paper, and those who want to really read something in depth can carry it around in the ute, and when you're stuck one day you can have a look at it. But by writing a paper, it makes us really do the sums properly and think deeply about the issue. So there's a paper published in your notes. There's some slides I'll flick through, only a couple of them I'll look at, because I just want to sort of make some points. I can't cover it all in half an hour. But before I talk about the research project, I want to talk about some of the things that came up during this project, more general things about coping with change, thinking about a decision and making a decision. And I guess the 3 points I suppose I should tell you to take home before we start. One is, if you're running a small place earning 2 to 4% return on capital, and you're high equity, really high equity, as this case study did, you can add a bit of capital to it. Adding a bit of capital to your existing capital can earn 10 to 30% and can be a really good deal, right? So when you've got the base farm and you add a bit to it, the return on the extra capital, its return on extra capital can be really high. That's the first point. Another point is, your costs are going to go up. We know that. They've always gone up and will continue. That's one thing you can be certain about. So to stay profitable, you've got to adapt somehow. It's a bit misleading to think about cutting costs. What we really talk about is increasing output to reduce the average cost per unit of output, which I'll explain that a bit more as we go on. And I suppose the third point to take home is that there's 2 types of risk. One's called business risk, which is basically rainfall and prices. The other's called financial risk, which is solely a function of how much debt you've got. And to grow your business, if you haven't got enough financial risk, you won't grow, but if you've got too much, you'll go broke. It's fairly obvious, but there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there who seem to miss that lecture. That's the lecture Alan Bond missed, by the way. So they're the main points to take home. But before I do that, so imagine we've got this farmer. He was a good farmer. He was in about mid-50s. He had 98% equity, about nearly $4 million assets. He was running 3,000 Coopworth ewes, Coopworth composites, getting 129% lambs mark per ewe mated, doing okay, $100,000, $150,000 annual profit, and he was fine. He was cruising. But then he had this dilemma, because the boy wanted to come home. There wasn't enough in it for 2 families, 560 hectares, right? In 10 years' time he'll starve. So the question was, where does he go from here? And we looked at a few options, and I'll take you through them. But so the first point we sort of come across was, if you're thinking about change, what are your goals? Like, if you don't know where you want to be, if you don't know where you want to go, any road will take you there. You've got to know where you want to go. So the first thing is define really what you want. And this guy, right, in 10 years' time, I need to have enough wealth and a big enough operation for the boy to move in and for me to move out. That was it. So define the goal. If you know your goal, you've got a chance of getting there. It's like the question of what's the direction to get to Dublin, and the answer was if I was going to Dublin, I wouldn't be starting from here. You've got to have your business in the right situation to be able to go on that road to achieve your goals. And having your business in the right situation means, having some, what I call surplus borrowing capacity. You're not borrowed to the hilt because you've got nowhere to go. Okay, but then probably not sitting on 100% equity either, because you're going to everyone's going to run past you. They're the sorts of lessons that come out. But the first thing is, why do anything? And I've already mentioned that, because your costs are going to go up. Status quo is not an option. If you keep running your farms as they are now, in 10 years' time, you'll actually be poorer. It's just the way the economy works, and the way it's going to work. So, if you think back to 10 years, what you're doing and what you're doing now, the world changes around us, and your costs are going to go up. So that's your choice, really, as a farmer. And farmers are terrific at it. They stay in business for generations. And they do it by improving what they do all the time. So there's nothing new there. But that's why we need to do things, is because we've got goals we want to meet, and we've got cost pressures that are continually there. In looking at thinking about what I was going to talk about today, I thought I'd go back to the ancients. There's a lot of sense spoken and written about farming, in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, going back 100 BC. It's astonishing. Some of the just common sense stuff about soil organic matter, about rotations, about managing a business. A lot of it's bleeding obvious and common sense, right? So in some ways, some things never change. In other ways, everything's going to change. Okay, so that's the challenge of farming. But talking about cutting costs, Cicero said, men do not realise how great a revenue economy is. Frugality is a great source of income. Now that's, in a well-run operation, it's already frugal. I know, because you haven't had the choice, right? So the idea that you can cut costs, just cut your costs, the costs are going up, I'll cut them, isn't the answer, is it? The way you cut costs is by increasing output and reducing the average cost per unit of output. So it's not as simple. There's always been some farms that they never made any money, they just never spent any. Now they've always been hopeless. We've always had neighbours like that, haven't we? Anyway, all of you could think of a neighbour like that. Never made anything, just never spent anything, and they battled on. It took them a long time to go broke, but you can live tight, you can starve. So anyway, I don't think that's a recipe for the future, even if it's enabled people to survive in the past. I think we've got to be more proactive, is the point there. Now I want to talk a little bit about making decisions and analysing decisions. In my sort of experience, some farmers spend too little time learning, thinking about the decision. Some spend too much. Right? The guys who spend too little, they're the ones who, they're often wrong, but they're never in doubt. I've never been wrong in my life. I thought I was once, but I was wrong. Those blokes, right? They spend too little time thinking about their decision. The other guys spend too much time. I used to be indecisive, but now I'm not so sure. They try and tackle a problem by searching for a solution that's more complex than the actual problem is itself. And plenty of my science and economist colleagues do that too. So it is a balance. A good quote I saw going back 100 BC, investment in knowledge returns the best interest. And I thought, well, that's still true. And as an educator, I really believe that. Invest in human capital, build your own human capital, invest in knowledge. But then, somewhere between paralysis by analysis and just top of the head, I'll do it, there's the right amount of learning to make the decision and getting on with it, And there's a difference between plans and planning. I think planning is really useful, and a good decision, you get as much info as you can, and then you strike while the iron's hot. So planning is useful, but plans are useless. Because how can a plan be useful in a world that's constantly changing? And we don't know how it's going to change. So don't think, I say, have a plan and have an idea, but don't think the world's going to work out like that. Because as soon as you start implementing the plan, you've already changed your farm system. As well as the world around you, you've changed it anyway. So planning is used. Like, I had a bloke come to me the other day, and he said he had a great plan. And I said, that's not a plan. I said, that's an idea. And not a very good idea at that. You know, there's a big difference between top of the head ideas and doing a bit of thinking and planning. And I'll show you some analysis that we do where we try and just put a bit of rigour into these decisions. Another question that comes up is why act now? Like, when to act? Timing is everything. And to be honest, if I knew the answer to that, I wouldn't be standing here talking about it, because I'd be that wealthy it wouldn't be funny. Clearly, the best farmers I know, though, they do have that knack. They've got the guts to act in a counter-cyclical way. They're smart enough to see the herd mentality. They're smart enough to see through the sort of white shoe brigade, the urges out there who start shouting there's a boom on. But more than that, they have their business in a position to act when the opportunity arises. And it's easy to say and extremely difficult to do. But the best businesses I've seen over their life of say 30 or 40 years, they've had equity at about 85%, and then when the opportunities come along, like a drought or a crash in prices, they've expanded, they've dropped their equity down to 70%. That's that surplus of borrowing capacity I'm talking about, right? When the chance is there, you can move. So they've dropped it down to 70%, they've built it up again, same again, and they've done that 4 or 5 times and built up, say, from starting with 1 or 2 million to say 10 or 12 million over a period of time. And it's easy to say, it's obvious, it's common sense, but it's more difficult to do. But the best farmers I know, that's what they've done. Okay, so that's why I say it's timing. Now, I'm going to talk about the case study in a minute because I haven't got long, but in making all these decisions, we're talking about the future, and the future's unknowable, so we're talking about risk. So the first point to make is the difference between a good idea and the right idea. Or a good decision and the right decision, I should say. Now, a good decision is one that uses as much information as we can get and really weigh it up. You study the form guide. Whether it's the right decision or not depends whether your horse wins. So there's things out of your control anyway. So we can't be guaranteed it'll be a right decision, but what I think is there's a better chance it'll be a right decision if you make a good decision. Otherwise, you just got to be lucky. And again, if we knew how to be lucky, we wouldn't have to come to meetings to hear people talk about it, would we? So good decisions give you a chance of it being the right decision. And now we're talking about the future. Albert Einstein, who knew a bit about things, but he didn't know much about farming. Albert said, never think about the future, it comes soon enough. So he said, don't worry about it, you can't change it, it's going to come, don't think about it. And it's not often you get a chance to tell Albert Einstein he's wrong, but I've got the chance because he's totally wrong. Because the future is coming soon enough is all the more reason we should think about it in farming, because we're going to have to deal with it. And it's going to be different to what we're doing at the moment. So I'd say think about the future because it's coming soon enough. So sorry, Albert, you're wrong, mate. But a funny thing, reading all this ancient, Albert's not ancient, but reading a lot of what smart people have said about agriculture, so often a common theme has been the ignorance about agriculture in seats of power, going back to the Greeks and the Romans, 2,000 years ago. And it just struck me that amongst the other things farming has to battle is this ignorance amongst seats of power about farming. And if you take, Canberra, for instance, most of what I see in Canberra would know as much about farming as a pig would know about a holiday. And that really makes it harder than it should be. But that's another thing we've got to work with. So Albert was wrong. We've got to think about the future. And a better quote I saw was, look to the future as far as the eye can see. Obvious. I mean, that's what we do. But the best quote I saw about the future was, and this is, I thought, I hadn't seen this before, guard against the future as if it were the present. So the things we can see coming in the future, let's act as though they're here now. So these rising costs that are coming, let's act as though they're here now. The rougher weather that's coming, the hotter, drier weather that's coming, let's act as though it's here now. So I like that. I thought that is one thing to take home, tell your kids. Guard against the future as if it were the present. Okay? Now, just to finish up on this stuff, and I'll go on to the slides in a minute, but just talking about the future, there's one way of thinking about the future. Because it's unknowable and unknown, and it's risky, we need to think in terms of probabilities. Now, this is intuitive to some people, not to others. The odds of something happening. And people misunderstand probabilities. Like, if one example I had was, I heard, there's 50% chance it'll rain on Saturday and 50% chance it'll rain on Sunday. And I put that to a group of farmers, and a few of the farmers said, oh, it's certain to rain over the weekend then. And these are smart farmers, but a lot of people don't get probabilities very well. Another one, you'll hear this a lot, there's 30% chance it'll rain on Saturday. Some people think now it means, it's going to rain in 30% of the area. Others think, it's going to rain for 30% of Saturday. Whereas what it really means is, when the conditions are like this, on 30% of Saturdays with conditions like this, it'll rain. Okay? And so that's the only way we can think about the future, because it is unknowable and uncertain. I'll give you another good example, reading on the plane coming up. At the minute, the Bureau of Met is 70% sure, given the SOI and the ocean temperatures, the way they're building, or the way SOI is dropping, at the moment we're 70%, best information, we're 70% sure that an El Nino event might happen at the moment. So I'd been seeing paper reports saying, El Nino's coming, and then I thought, dry spell's coming. But this is all probabilistic. Firstly, at the moment, there's 70% chance it'll come, so that's pretty strong odds, right? When the conditions are like this, 7 times out of 10 it'll develop into an El Nino. The next thing is, when we have an El Nino, especially north from here, about 65 to 70% of the time it'll become a drought. So you put those two probabilities together, 70% chance we'll get an El Nino, and 70% chance if we get an El Nino we'll get a drought, gives you about a 50% chance at the moment of facing a drought, an El Nino caused drought. So that alters your thinking to saying, we're certain to get a drought. Okay, so that's what I mean by probabilistic thinking. And you put the two, it's funny when you put the two probabilities together, and it puts it in a different perspective. So at the moment I'd be saying, on the evidence, there's half a chance we're going to run into a dry spell, from spring going into next year. Even money bet. That's on the evidence at the moment. So that's how we think about the future. Now,
You don't have one.
righto, good, that's good. So we're halfway there. Just a couple of other points I want to make, then I'll get on to the slides. What's the characteristics of the best farmers? The best farmers I know, they've got 3 characteristics. They're passionate about their business, they love it. They want to be the best at it. They really want to be the best in the district, or the best in the world. They want to be best at it. And the third thing is characteristic, they really know what it is in their business that makes the money. They're the three characteristics I see when all the best farmers I deal with, they're the 3 characteristics. They love it, obviously, they want to be the best at it, and they really know what it is in their business that makes them the money. And I saw a quote from Ben Franklin saying, drive the business or it will drive you. And I thought, that's, a lot of sensible stuff said a long time ago. But I want to talk a little bit about, and the other characteristic I find the best farmers is, and I call it facing the brutal facts. They're hard-headed. There's a saying in agriculture, you live in hope and you die hungry. We all delude ourselves, but I think it's dangerous in agriculture, because you've got so much going against you in climate and prices and all that reality deserves a run. hope deceives, all that stuff. Optimism involves an intellectual flaw. That's what you get when you grow up in the Mallee. That's what you think about. But there's a saying from Ireland, which I heard, all that glisters isn't gold. And then they added, even donkey droppings glisten. And what I'm getting at there is there's a lot of hype at the moment from the White Shoe Brigade. Australia's going to feed the world. Let's be realistic about this. Farmers can feed 60 million people and do a fantastic job to do that. And in 10 or 20 years, maybe we might double that. But that's not feeding 9 billion people. We will do a good job and we'll make money from doing it, but let's keep it in perspective. And when people talk about there's going to be 9 billion people by 2050, therefore all farmers are going to make a lot of money, it doesn't work like that. Some farmers, good farmers all around the world, will do okay, as always, and those who don't do well will drop out. But your competitors are all around the world. Like the potential for agricultural production and increased output in some parts of the world are much greater than in Australia, because we're much more down the track. So, I get wary when I hear people talking boom times for agriculture. There's good times for good farmers, and there always have been, and that's sort of my take on it. The final thing is, so what change do you think about? I've said you don't have a choice. You're going to have to change. Then the question is, what change? The rule is it ain't what you do, but how you do it. It really is. Like, there's many systems of farming in the right hands that are profitable. So get away from this idea that there's one system that's best. It's nonsense. It all depends on the manager. And I've seen good managers make all sorts of systems really profitable, which other managers couldn't dream of making profitable. So it ain't the system, it's the manager. So if you're a good manager, it doesn't matter particularly which activity or system you run, because you'll make a go of it. So another saying I saw, which I thought was good: milk the cow which is near, why pursue the one that runs away? And I thought that's good, because I spent a lot of time in New Zealand, and I found the New Zealand farmers, all they could talk about was going and investing in Chile and Uruguay and Argentina, and I thought, Jesus, there's no shortage of investment opportunities in your backyard. And I think that applies here too. Like, it can make sense to get some spatial distribution to cover climate. That makes sense, but milk the cow that is near, I think, is pretty good advice too. All right, the final thing is, what stops farms getting bigger and bigger? I've said you've got to change, you've got to get bigger in one way or another. What stops you getting bigger than bigger? People often think, it's the complexity, it's the management difficulties, it's harder and harder, and it is in livestock more than cropping, because there are economies of size in cropping, not much in livestock. As your livestock numbers increase, your labour and feed costs go up in direct proportion. What stops getting, it's called the principle of increasing financial risk. It's just, to get bigger, if you're going to have to use other people's money, you've got to pay them interest. So the amount of debt you can service is the one that determines how much bigger you can get. Now, I've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to flick through a couple of slides that make some of this point about this analysis. My colleagues worked with me. There's the farm we looked at, and there's the base farm, 560 hectares, average 16 DSE. It was some good country and some rough country. 129% lambs marked per ewes mated, doing a pretty good job. Where does he go? We had a farmer steering group identified 4 options. One, bit extra feed, bit better management, bit more fencing, pump the lambing up to 145%. That's one option, didn't cost much. Second one was there were some undeveloped parts of the farm, get the whole farm up to 20 DSE, $300,000 extra. Sort of no-brainer, that one. This one, it depends if you can do it or not. I don't know, you'll know better than me whether that makes sense. They're low capital options. Here, the bigger capital options, spend over $1 million and buy the farm next door, 240 hectares, and then run it at the sort of same as the base farm of 16 DSE, or buy the farm and pump it up. Okay, so that's the high capital option, and so we went through all them. I won't go through that stuff. That's the point I made. at costs per unit of output, number of units of output combined. So we're trying to increase the profit. In this analysis, we've got the costs going up, this cost price squeeze, we've got this in the analysis. We run it over 7 years. We put in a whole range of prices you could get, whole range of rainfall, whole range of dry matter you could grow, whole range of interest rates. And so we take account of risk, but I want to get through to... So there's the thing, you'll look at this in the notes, cost of producing $1 of income. The status quo had the highest cost, so we said that's not an option. Each of these others reduced the cost of producing $1 of income. The high capital ones produced a lot more income over 7 years than the lower capital ones. All the options made the farm more profitable, generated more cash flow, and ultimately built more wealth, which is what we said it was all about. And we explain that more in the paper. I just want to get through to another slide. This is important, this business risk and financial risk. As I said, business risk is yield, rainfall, prices, interest rates. Financial risk is the one you've got some control over when you make a decision about how much debt you reckon you can carry. And so we separate the two out, and it'll become obvious here. Wait on. So there's the total risk story. We've got risk here. This is a measure of risk. So here was 98% equity, right? Low risk, reasonable operation, but low risk, and low risk, low income. Like if you want a low risk life, it's easy. You just don't earn any money or make any wealth, because risk creates wealth in return. Risk creates return is the idea. So if you've got a low risk business, that's fine, but you just won't make enough to meet your goals probably, especially if you're trying to set up the next generation, all that sort of stuff. So as we increase risk, everything went up, the profit went up, the cash went up, the wealth went up. But so did the risk, and I'll show you more clearly there. The blue line is the yield and price risk, interest rate risk, not interest rate risk, sorry, yield and price basically, rainfall, lamb turn off, lamb price, and it was pretty similar. Even when we changed the business, expanded the business, the exposure to that risk didn't change because you're still doing the same thing. You're still facing the rainfall risk and the lamb price risk, right? What changed was when we had to borrow some money. So we had very little financial risk here. The base farm didn't put much money into the lambing percentage one, a bit more money there. Spending over $1 million, $2 million to buy this extra land, you know, doubled the total risk of the business. And it's probably a step too far, you know. You might be happy to buy 120 hectares, not 240, and do it in bites or do it in stages. Maybe do the first get the home place fired up a bit more to get the cash flow going better, to then be able to service this sort of extra risk that they're going to face. So that's really one of the important points, I reckon, is that when I say you haven't got a choice but to change, I'm also saying it doesn't seem like we've got a choice except to take on more risk, because it's hard to make that change if you're borrowing the money without increasing your financial risk. But that's fine, because if you take on the risk, a reasonable amount of risk, you'll actually make more profit and grow your wealth quicker. And that's that principle of increasing risk means that if you manage other people's well and things go well, you'll grow faster than if you don't use other people's money.
2 minutes.
Righto. The downside is when things go badly, you go backwards faster than you would have went forward. So it ain't easy, but you can go bust from having too much risk or too little risk is the message that comes out of that. So each of those changes, they're all sensible. As I say, they were identified by the farmer steering group. The farmer himself was torn. He thought he might do it in stages. He saw scope to pump up the current operation a bit, wait for the timings right. Land prices have been pretty flat down there where he was. He thought he had a bit of time up his sleeve before he made the next move. So he was going to sneak up on it, which is always a sensible approach anyway. So borrowing and buying and intensifying more land increased the financial risk and the business risk, but at the same time increased the net cash flow. And this was the thing. If he bought that extra land, he really had to lift its performance to service the debt. right? Just buying and I'm ignoring rises in land value. His wealth will tick over at 5% anyway because he owns it. That's the land business. But if he took on this extra $1.5 million worth of land, he really had to increase his carrying capacity because he's got extra debt to service. So that seemed to be one of the messages that's come out of it. So he had to intensify it as well as extensify. And so that's where it ends up. We know it's a gamble. We know you've got to weigh the bet up. But all I'm saying is that a bit of rigorous thinking and analysis can help make a more informed bet. And that's about all we can do when we face an unknowable future. Okay, that'll do. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Bill. I'd like you to Bill.